Welcome to Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner.
Mein Kampf Reborn Groypers Poisoned by Hate. Interesting show, stick around. Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Today is September 16th, 2025. Tonight's episode is all about the book Mein Kampf, written by Hitler himself. And it's been reborn through the Groypers movement, and it's been poisoned by hate, and I'm going to prove it to you tonight. It's going to be quite an interesting episode. Let's see if we get 1,000 viewers like we did last night. Very, very, very interesting. Shout out to everybody on the live chat Rumble. We've got Scorpion #1 saying Groyper War Round 2. Interesting, yes. Next is Jeffrey saying, #2 Warrior saying, hey y'all, have you heard TikTok was just bought by a rich Jewish man? I did not hear that. Wouldn't surprise me. Scorpion then says, wouldn't surprise him either. And then Jeffrey says, Kanye was right, and maybe Adolf was fighting against the bankers. We're going to talk about that. He actually was, but he had so much hate for a class of people that he poisoned the well. That's what we're going to be talking about. You see, Mein Kampf is truth mixed with poison so that we don't look towards the main issue, which is bankers, all right? And it's not just Jewish bankers. It's just bankers in general. You know what? I've got something on my hair. Yeah. I was rolling in the that just bothers me. I was rolling in the dirt with the dog, having fun. So yeah, it's not just a Jewish thing. The bankers are all over the place with all types of belief systems, etc. But they're using the idea of Judaism and the Jews to make us go after that instead of focusing on the actual real people, which are the 13 Black Nobility families that we have learned about on this show. Next warrior is Sheila saying, hey family, and then Robert Gertison is here saying, hi James and all. Guys, welcome to the show. Let's get into the shitty breaking news. Well, Charlie Kirk shooting suspect charged with murder as prosecutors say they'll seek the death penalty. Well, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. Senator Booker tells Patel, you're not going to be around long, as FBI director. Again, they're just playing their part. They're handed a script, and that's how it works. The left and the right are controlled by the same entities. Remember, this show is called Cause Before Symptom. We find the cause, and we don't really talk much about the symptoms. The symptoms are actors like Senator Cory Booker, okay? They're just actors up there. And even Trump admitted it. He said, hey, we hired, Castle Rock to do our media. It's a movie we're watching. Now, it's not a Q movie like everyone thinks. It's not going to go in that direction because I think we were played with the same Project Trust that happened to Russia when the Bolshevik Revolution took place. So it's we're being completely controlled, and there's a narrative they're trying to fulfill. And right now, they're moving towards the Albert Pike narrative of World War III being fought between Islam and Christianity and Judaism. That is coming, and that's what they're setting the stage up for, and it takes time, all right? MAGA debates how to respond to Kirk's killing. Well, they're going to have to because, well, it's looking like it's on the MAGA side. Many leftists are saying it's MAGA on MAGA violence. Well, the funny thing is it's an alt-right group of people called the Groypers who were initiated by Nick Fuentes Nick Fuentes. And their little thing, and I just found out that Nick Fuentes was the campaign manager for Kanye West when he ran for president. Isn't that interesting? You see, you do some research, and you start to find the truth. The truth is they are playing us like a fiddle. Trump delays TikTok ban again as a deal takes shape. Well, as we just found out by Jeffrey, apparently a Jewish buyer is coming in. He's going to take over TikTok and make some money. New York judge dismisses state terrorism charges against Luigi Mangione. Well, okay then. And Memphis residents welcome President Trump's action to restore public safety in Memphis, Tennessee. I didn't realize it was so bad in Tennessee. Now, I have friends that live near there, and they say it is bad, but isn't that a red state? I thought Trump was going after all the blue states, but what do I know? I'm just a hick from Oregon, and that is the breaking, shitty, crappy news. All right, stick around, folks. We're going to go to a commercial, and then when we come back, we're going to talk more about the book Mein Kampf, how it's been reborn, and the Groypers have actually poisoned it through hate. Yeah, it's really happening.
Do you have tax burdens? Do you carry personal liability? If so, let me tell you why you have tax burdens and personal liability. And if you stick with me until the end, I'll share a simple solution to reduce the burdens you carry. When you put assets in your name, you also carry the liability. And by setting up a corporation, LLC, or partnership, you also carry the liability for the share of ownership you have in these organizations. So when you receive a W-2 form, 1099, or K-1 at the end of each year, that shows your liability for the assets you have carried in your name or your business name. The flow of liability works this way. You get a job, you take money in your name. When you are a contractor, you take money in your name. When you begin a business, you take money in the business name, which is set up with you as the owner. Nelson Rockefeller quoted, "The secret to success is to own nothing but control everything." He said this because when you own something in your name, you also own the liabilities. Introducing the solution. Begin an unincorporated association and remove assets out of your name while remaining in control and management of them. An unincorporated association is a state-registered entity that you can put assets into, is member-based and not tied to your name, has a tax-exempt EIN number, is private and not found when doing an online search. Whether you receive a 1099 or K-1 under your name, consider setting up your own unincorporated association and allow the association to be the owner of your assets and free yourself from the burden of personal liability. P.S. Join our affiliate program and receive payment for referrals.
All right, welcome back to the show. So last night we did a show, and it seemed like it was just a normal, typical show that we do. And we got bombarded with 1,000 viewers, and it stayed pretty consistent at around 800 to 1,000 for generally about a good hour and 15 minutes. It was quite shocking. I wasn't expecting it. I was a little nervous too, because I'm like, geez, if there's that many viewers, they have got to kind of understand what I'm talking about. And if you haven't followed me throughout history, you wouldn't understand my point of view and the research that I've done. And so, I tried to answer those questions in between, but it turns out that, yeah, that was real. When people went to Rumble and they typed in Nick Fuentes and Groypers, my video came up number 1 and people started watching it. So that's kind of cool. Wasn't expecting that. And on top of that, last night I started receiving some emails and some texts and some comments about the show from actual Groypers and people who don't support them but had opinions. And one of them had a very interesting dialogue with me, and it really, and they were quoting Mein Kampf, and I wanted to basically show you guys, because a lot of these Groypers, believe it or not, they view Hitler as the good guy. Not all, but we need to basically discern between what Mein Kampf really is all about, and the reason why Mein Kampf is does expose the bankers and the bad guys, right, who we're supposed to be focusing on, but it also shows that the well has been absolutely poisoned, and this book will put you into a hate mode, a racist hate mode, because that's how Hitler saw. You see, if he would have just stopped trying this, supremacy of trying to make the perfect, species, maybe things would have, maybe worked out, and the bankers would have been gone, and we wouldn't have a world like we do where they control everything through central banks, especially the Rothschild family and all the works that they have done. But regardless, I thought it would be important to explain why, if you ever hear from Groypers and they talk about Mein Kampf and they bring it up, well, we're going to talk about Mein Kampf and the difference between what Hitler was trying to do and also the hate that he had in his heart for the Jewish people. So that's what we're going to be going over. It's going to be a long show, so let's just go ahead and dive in. So last night, for some odd reason, we did have over 1,000 live viewers on Rumble rather than our usual 23, right? And I do believe, again, I said it was keywords, Nick Fuentes and Groypers, as this story was hot. It was hot yesterday. And I wasn't expecting it. And it was due to the fact that the shooter points to this strange alt-right group of incels, the Groypers. And the many Groypers emailed me and texted me many quotes from Mein Kampf. Well, I read the book, and I understand exactly what's going on here with the Groypers and what Nick Fuentes is up to. I do believe the Groypers are being played, and quite honestly, they don't care. Why? Well, because they actually have nothing to lose anyway. Okay? They've got no assets. They've got no valuables. They have no cars. They have nothing. All they have is this nihilist view of playing jokes on the elite, when the fact to the matter is the elite is playing a joke on them, and they don't even realize it. So tonight we enter into a dangerous ground here, not to glorify a man whose name has become a curse, Hitler, but to expose the weapon that he built and the way it is still used against us. Now, Adolf Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, is often dismissed as nothing more than a racist tract, a Bible for skinheads and white supremacists. But if we read it carefully, we find something even more sinister than that. It is a book that begins with truth about the destruction of Germany after the Great War, truth about the suffocating chains of debt and reparations, truth about how international finance can strangle nations and turn sovereign peoples into slaves. Yeah. And these things are real. And they were felt by ordinary Germans in the streets of Weimar. And they are still felt by men and women today when they look at Wall Street, central banks, and the monopolies that tower over them. So yeah, Hitler was onto something, and he was giving information, but to lure you in with the truth and then snare you with the poison. But Hitler did not stop at the truth. He did not frame his critique in the language of policy or law or class. He twisted it into the language of blood, a ritual. He declared that the forces of finance were not just corrupt institutions, but a corrupt people. He racialized the problem, naming Jews as the embodiment of everything he hated and feared. Let's take a step back here. These aren't the real Jews. These are the European Jews who aren't Jews but claim they are. They hijacked Judaism in order to create Israel, to control the world through being God's people. So let's not jump the gun and point it to the real Jews, which the Bible says are scattered amongst all the world. And really, nobody knows who the real Jews are unless they do blood work. And, well, we all know Israel and all of the leaders there won't get their blood tested for being Jewish. But the Bible says they're scattered right now. They haven't came home. They're not in Israel. All of that has been made and manufactured by the Black Nobility families and been financed through the Rothschild regime. So what Hitler did was racialized the problem, just naming Jews as the embodiment of the world being taken over. And he took what could have been a movement against the New World Order of banking and monopoly, and he laced it with hatred so venomous that the critic itself became radioactive. And from that day forward, any man who dared to speak of international finance, of stock exchange corruption, or of debt slavery could be smeared as another Hitler. Now, the elites smiled because the very weapon they feared had been spoiled at its root, right? The fear of being let out and the truth about the bankers and where they come from and what their goals are. Well, all that changed. Hitler basically told the truth and then poisoned the well. And that is the tactic that we will uncover tonight. It's the mixture of truth and poison. Now, Hitler's words show us how dangerous it is when the truth is joined with hate, how powerful it becomes for a season, and how devastating its consequences are for generations to come. We will actually walk through the history of a broken nation and the cry of Gottfried Feder against interest slavery, and the passages in Mein Kampf that sound eerily like our own cries against monopolies today. And then the poisonous thread that twisted truth into racial war. We will follow how Hitler betrayed even his own rhetoric to secure the backing of elites, meaning he betrayed his own philosophy and partnered with the bankers. So everything that he says can't be taken serious, right? Now, we will also follow how Hitler betrayed his own rhetoric, got backed by the elites, and how neo-Nazis and hate groups later clung to his venom, and how modern intelligence networks recycle the same playbook of mixing truth with extremism to discredit dissent. Now, Trump coming on board with his hatred of government, right, and the left and the left, well, in a way, we're kind of mirroring Germany post-World War I, because Germany was under the control of the bankers after that war. And so what we're finding is there's going to be soon more different political groups that are going to come out of the blue that we never even heard of before, that is going to change the direction of the political landscape to sow more chaos. And it could either lead to either civil war or it could lead to world war. We just don't know. But I do know that the Groyper movement is an old plan that is being executed again in America to sow discord, divide the country, and keep us angry at each other instead of the real problems that we must face as a debt nation. Now, this is not just about Germany either. It's about every age where Satan takes a kernel of truth and wraps it in darkness, so that men who hunger for freedom are led into chains. Our calling is to reclaim the truth, stripped of the poison, and to stand against global monopolies without falling into the old trap of scapegoating. So tonight we're going to separate the wheat from the tares. And tonight we reclaim what was actually stolen. We're going to bring out the truth, and we will explain why Mein Kampf is interesting to the Groypers, but they're taking it in another area. And this is what a broken nation does. And we're going to explain the Versailles and the ruin of it. Boots just made it, says, all right, warriors, come out and pray, yay. Hello, James and Warrior family, hoping everyone is doing well. Hit that thumbs up button, then hit the X. Yes, I did. I hope you guys did. There's only me gave it the thumbs up, so you guys need to go in there and hit the thumbs up as well. Again, Rumble only gives me credit if you guys give me the thumbs up. They will not put me up anywhere just because of my subscribers. Now, Germany in 1919 was not simply a defeated nation. It was a nation humiliated, starved, and shackled. And the Treaty of Versailles demanded reparations that no economy could bear. It was a staggering sum, meant not only to pay debts, but to keep Germany permanently on her knees. The German people felt this in their bones. The price of bread soaring beyond reach, savings wiped out overnight as the mark collapsed, and entire families reduced to begging. And veterans returned from the trenches to find no work, no honor, no future. They had fought under the banner of the Kaiser, believing themselves to be the most disciplined, the most organized, the most formidable army in the world. And yet they were told they had lost because of betrayal and not because of the battlefield. Out of this soil of despair, conspiracy theories flowered like weeds, and men sought explanations that would give shape to their own suffering. It is in this crucible that Adolf Hitler began to form his worldview. And he was not alone. Across Germany, the stab in the back myth spread like wildfire. That Germany had not truly been defeated in the field, but had been betrayed from within by politicians, profiteers, and shadow interest groups who had signed away the nation's honor. And the hunger for someone to blame was desperate. And when a people are desperate, they are willing to accept simple answers, no matter how poisonous they are. In Mein Kampf, Hitler describes walking the streets of Vienna before the war, already filled with resentment against what he saw as the decadence of modern life. He speaks of observing poverty, prostitution, corruption, and he ties these conditions not to systems, but to persons. Not to the complexity of modern economics, but to a single enemy from within. Not to the Black Nobility families, but to a certain race of people. And when he returned to Munich after the war, battered and bitter, he found the Weimar Republic presiding over chaos and humiliation. The nation seemed leaderless, its spirit broken, its pride trampled. And Hitler writes that the German people had lost the instinct for self-preservation. And he blamed this on the corrosive influence of parliament, the press, but above all, international finance, or central banks. But they didn't call it central banks back then. Now here's where the first seed of his later poison is sown. For Hitler, the ruin of Germany was not merely the result of bad treaties or corrupt politicians or the punishment of war. It was evidence of a deeper conspiracy, an unseen hand strangling the nation through debt and humiliation. And this hand, he would later argue, had a racial face. But before he named the scapegoat, he named the wound, debt, monopoly, and finance, as the instruments of control. And this is why his words had such a double edge. On one side, he describes the reality of a people stripped of their future by bankers in London, Paris, and New York, who demanded payments that would never end. And on the other side, he frames this suffering not as the product of political greed and financial parasitism in general, but as the work of a people, a race, and a bloodline. And in that moment, the truth of economic dispossession was chained forever to the venom of racial hatred. This was the Germany that birthed Mein Kampf, a nation hungry for hope, desperate for dignity and willing to believe the man who told them their suffering had a simple cause. And the elites had written the treaty, the bankers had written the loans, but Hitler gave those faceless systems a name and a race. Probably not such a good idea. And with that, he began to build a movement on the foundation of truth corrupted. Now, if Hitler's bitterness was the soil, okay, Gottfried Fieder was the seed that germinated his economic worldview. Now, Fieder was not a general, nor a politician by birth. He was an engineer. And yet his pamphlets, lectures, and slogans would ignite a fire in the hearts of disillusioned Germans. Fieder's central cry was against what he called Zieknickstoff, or interest slavery. Oh, we all know what that is here, don't we? And in Fieder's view, the great sickness of modern civilization was the dominance of loan capital. Money that made more money through interest without producing anything tangible. He believed this system was the chain around Germany's neck, binding her people to unseen masters in foreign capitals. Now, Fieder's manifesto for the abolition of interest slavery actually landed in Hitler's hands in 1919. And Hitler himself admitted in Mein Kampf that it was like a revelation. He wrote that in Fieder's words, he suddenly grasped the difference between what he called productive capital and the money and labor that built factories, made goods, and sustained life as rapacious capital. Rapacious, like rape capital. And the stock exchange and banking interests that seemed to feed off nations without giving anything back. This distinction was intoxicating to men who had just seen their wages destroyed by hyperinflation, and their pensions reduced to nothing, and their country auctioned to foreign creditors. You know, central banks, the bankers, the real cause. Now, Hitler recalls in his book how he first heard Fieder speak in Munich, describing international finance as a parasitic force that enslaves nations. He wrote that his lecture was the turning point when he realized he had found the ideological weapon that he needed. Suddenly, all the confusion of politics, left and right, capitalism and socialism, seemed to fall away. Here was an explanation that cut deeper. A nation was not sick because of internal squabbles, but because of an alien form of finance that had burrowed into the bloodstream, especially of Germany's economy. But Fieder's brilliance, if brilliance it can be called, was not simply in diagnosing a problem. It was in offering a false hope. He argued that if Germany could free herself from interest-bearing capital, if the state could separate healthy, productive capital from parasitic financial capital, or borrowing money from central banks in other countries, then the nation would be reborn. Factories would hum. Workers would thrive. Farmers would prosper. It was a vision of national redemption, one that resonated with the humiliated veterans and the starving poor alike in Germany at that time. Now, you have to remember, Germany had its own money. They printed their own money. What it was backed by, I believe it was gold. And Germany's money wasn't the problem. The problem was Germany, through politicians and not treaties, but just declarations that were signed, law that was signed, they borrowed from France, from the Bank of France, the Central Bank of France, and they borrowed money from the Bank of England which is controlled by London, and a few others. And the money that they borrowed, Germany couldn't seem to put it back into making money off of the money they borrowed. So Germany had these monthly payments to these central banks that were insane, very big debts. And Germany didn't, and Hitler didn't blame it on the politicians that took out the loans from central banks. He blamed it on a race of people. But he took to Feder. And yet Feder himself did not make the leap into racial hatred at all. That's where Hitler came in. Feder saw interest slavery as a system, not a bloodline. But it was Hitler who added the poison, insisting that the rapacious capital had a face, and that face was Jewish. That's what he said. And here again, the truth is contaminated. Because in Feder's framework, there was at least the possibility of reform. A government could abolish usury, regulate their banks, and encourage productive investment. You see, Germany could have just told the central bank, screw you, you'll get what you get from us, period. Add your interest, we don't care. And then focus on their economy inward. But that's not what they did. Now here again, the truth is contaminated because in Feder's framework, there was at least the possibility of reform. A government could abolish usury, regulate banks, and encourage productive investment. But in Hitler's framework, reform was impossible because the enemy was not an institution, but a people. So he had hate, thinking that a group or race of people are the ones responsible for his country in decline. Now, the Nazi Party's early program, its famous 25 points, bore Feder's fingerprints, and it called for the abolition of unearned incomes, for the breaking of interest slavery, for nationalization of trusts, and for profit sharing with workers. Now, these promises made the party attractive to the disillusioned lower middle class. Men who felt squeezed between Marxists on the left and oligarchs on the right. But the program was a trap because Hitler never intended to carry it through. As we will see, once he had used Feder's ideas to gather a following, he quickly discarded the radical anti-finance policies to court the very industrialists and bankers he had once condemned. Hypocrite. But in these early days, Feder's vision gave Hitler his ideological weapon, a way to explain German suffering through a language of finance, debt, and monopoly. It gave him the appearance of being a revolutionary, a man who would strike at the root of the problem rather than the branches. And it gave him the rhetorical power to unify men across political lines by declaring that left and right were illusions compared to the real battle, the nation against international finance. Yeah. So this is why part 2 matters. This is the part 2 what I'm reading. Because it shows us that Hitler did not create his economic worldview alone. He stole it from Feder and then added his hatred of Jews following. He borrowed it from a man who believed he had uncovered the hidden chains of the world. But by adding the venom of race, Hitler ensured that the critique would never liberate. It would only enslave anew. Thanks, Hitler. But you won't get that and learn that kind of history when you learn about the Groypers and how they just use Mein Kampf and just, quote, because they don't care about any of it. All they care about is chaos against the country because they've got nothing to lose. This is the Groypers, whom are led by Nick Fuentes, who was Kanye West's campaign manager when he ran for president. See, what I'm trying to get to here, is that all the world is a stage. Everything is staged. Movements like the Groypers, an alt-right movement of femboy creators, which they hate women, turn men gay and feminize them, and form a nihilist alliance of people who say they're Christian, but are the exact opposite of what Jesus taught. And movements like this don't come from educated people, because education has been taken away from our universities. It comes from lonely people who are left on the side by the left and the right, have no place to fit in, and were picked up by the elites, the Black Nobilities, to be in an army or force to steer us into another form of chaos that we never saw coming. Now, there are many people online who've talked about it over and over the years, but they never made the, I would say, publicity up until Charlie Kirk was murdered and assassinated. And this is because the murderer has been pointed to being a Groyper, which our show last night, I was trying to explain what a Groyper is, how long they've been around, how they've stolen the Pepe the Frog meme from the Q and Anon movement, which was all bullshit. And here's this new thing to confuse us so that we continue to keep our eye off of what the leaders are actually doing. You see, when an event happens and people are talking about it, something else happened underneath everyone's noses where they signed more of our liberties away. And the Groyper movement was needed to take the ball off of not only left and right, but to confuse us so that we don't come together and fight against the real enemy, the bankers. Now, the bankers are not all Jewish. They're not all Talmudic, Kabbalist, Judaist followers, like Hitler thought. The bankers, most aren't even religious other than they believe that Zoroastrianism, since it was the first religion after post-flood, is the only logical religion. But they do believe in magic. They do believe in science, and they do believe in manipulating matter and using that to produce mind control. And that's what I've been fascinated with. How, like 300 years ago, just one group of dynasties can control the entire world through a spell. Well, we've been uncovering all of that. The spell is not unique. It's something that has been practiced from their ancestors and handed down from dynasty to dynasty. Name change to name change. And so Mein Kampf and Hitler are only a symptom of the actual cause, which are families who have bloodlines who think that they have inherited the earth from their prior family you know, grandpas and fathers, and making certain things like the Groypers to continue to divide and conquer us. And then turning around and saying, well, Hitler was a good guy. Slow down. He hated a race. He was a hater. He was a racist. And remember, the Jews are scattered amongst the earth. There is not one place, and no, Israel doesn't have the real Jews. They think they're Jews. And yes, there are probably some real bloodline Jews from the Adamic bloodline in Israel, but none of them are in control of Israel. No. The ones that control Israel are the fake Jews, the Zionists, the ones who took a religion and made it their own. And the research that I found, it came from Persia after King Solomon and the temple was torn down and raided, taking all of the gold of Israel and taken their religion as well into Persia. And we've learned that it went from Persia up into Austria, where King Solomon's gold was dispersed and used against us to create the second and third industrial revolutions. All for their goal of bringing in their God or Messiah. Now, none of them actually practice the religion of Judaism, following the laws or the Torah, nor do they follow any of the Zoroastrian occult belief systems, but they do believe in Enochian magic. Because when they do the spells and incantations, they are able to speak to what they believe are interdimensional beings. Now, those who follow the Bible, those who have faith, you could call those demons, or above them would be the principalities. But this is my point. The real enemy is not the Jews. But the Jewish religion is being used as an enemy so that they can force what looks and appears to be Armageddon. Because apparently there's money to be made. And they can use religion to control nations and land and resources in the name of God. And what we've learned from the Enochian, or not Enochian, but the Ethiopian canon, that if true, we are living in the days of Satan's little season. And in the Ethiopian canon, Israel is surrounded by the entire world. And Israel is doing what they're doing because they believe that, hey, if the God of the Judaic Bible, the Torah, is going to protect that land because they know that Jesus is going to descend there, well, no one can take it out, no matter how hard they try, because Scripture, prophecy says so. So they're using that towards their advantage to gain more influence, money, land, and power. So that's why I say that Germany, World War I, World War II are just symptoms of the real cause, and the cause are the money changers that Jesus has talked about, who Jesus never committed a sin, yet he built and fashioned a whip, went into the temple and whipped them and turned their tables over because they were selling doves for ancestors to be released from hell. Well, buy a dove and your dad will come escape hell and go into heaven. Okay. Using religion for money. That's the problem. And they know this because they want us to hate religion after the Third World War that Albert Pike predicts. They want us to hate religion so much that we will take any ethos or epic in order to replace it. And so the Christian name with the Groypers is not by accident. Some may not even really read the Bible. They just follow along because all of their friends online are doing the same thing. Now, with the book Mein Kampf, when we open it and read Hitler's words about finance, it's easy to see why some modern readers pause and say, wait a minute, this sounds like what we are saying about the New World Order. And over, Hitler rails against stock exchange speculation, which we know is all just a gamble, this gambling racket. And international monopolies like Amazon, Nvidia, Microsoft. Microsoft's a big one. And the invisible power of bankers like the Bank for International Settlements and the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Who can bend entire nations to their will through debt. And Hitler insisted in his book Mein Kampf that the economic system is designed to enslave the many for the benefit of the few. And he denounces politicians who sell out their people to the dictates of finance. He even declares that the traditional left and right are illusions and masks for a deeper reality of money's grip. Well, doesn't the Bible say, for the love of money is the root of all evil? So Hitler's language here, it's fierce. And he calls stock exchange capital a tumor that grows at the expense of the national body. And he claims that international finance is rootless and therefore disloyal to any one nation, ready to betray borders for profit. And he writes that wars are not fought for honor or defense, but at the bidding of financiers who use nations as pawns in their games. Yeah, we could all agree with that. And that has nothing to do with a race or white supremacy. These lines strike like thunder because they echo what many in our time feel about globalization, central banking, and the consolidation of corporate power. And when a handful of institutions can manipulate currencies, crash economies, and dictate terms to sovereign governments, people begin to see exactly what Hitler described: a hidden hand pulling the strings. But he had to add race into it, which tells me that Hitler was a plant. To give some truths, but follow the truth with poison. So that history will not look at Hitler for the one who stood up against the bankers, but look at Hitler as the one who exterminated 6 million Jews. So he draws a sharp line between what he calls productive capital and rapacious capital. Remember, rape capital. Well, that's money lending, that's usury. And productive capital builds things like factories, roads, machines, and even food. It is tangible and life-giving. And rapacious capital, he argues, is parasitic. It buys and sells paper, speculates on markets, and manipulates money for gain without ever producing anything real. Kind of like Enron, when they were exchanging and trading energy. There was nothing real about it. Energy is energy. It was a scam. And in this distinction, Hitler is not unique. Thinkers across cultures and centuries have condemned usury, speculation, and parasitic finance. Even the Bible warns against interest that devours the poor. and church fathers thundered against usury as a sin. And in these moments, Hitler is borrowing truths far older than himself. Truths that resonate because they are rooted in the lived experience of millions crushed by debt. And yet here lies the snare. To change history, to make sure that the truth was poisoned. Because as much as Hitler spoke of finance in abstract terms, he never let it remain abstract. So again and again, he insisted that globalists or international finance was not just a system, but the outworking of Jewish blood. Well, he was sort of right, because they weren't all Jewish. The Bank of France, the Central Bank of France, or what is it, the Bank of Italy, they are not Jewish. So how could he say that they in France are the Jewish blood? And the Bank of England, who lent money with high interest rates to Germany, how could he call them Jewish blood? See, he was so focused on hatred towards what he believed was a small group of people controlling the world, and they're all Jews, and that's just simply not the truth, not what I've uncovered. So for him, the banker was not simply a parasite, but a Jew. And the stock exchange was not simply corrupt, but racially tainted. And in this way, every passage that begins as a critique of systems ends as an accusation against a people. That's narrow-minded. And this is how truth becomes radioactive. Now, if you don't read Mein Kampf and you don't have an understanding of history and an understanding of the dynasties and the Black Nobilities and what they really truly believe in, if you don't have any of that, you are going to just assume. What do they say? Assume. You make an ass out of you and me. And still, if we pause on the surface level of all of this, just the surface level, we see why Hitler's book can sound aligned with our own critiques of the New World Order. Because he speaks of the way debt strangles nations. And he warns against monopolies that destroy local economies. He mocks political labels that distract from the real powers pulling the strings. These observations are not false. They are sharp, biting, and in some cases prophetic. But the difference lies in what you do with the truth once you find it. Hitler used it as a weapon of hate to mobilize a nation into war and genocide. If we reclaim the truth, stripped of venom, we can use it as a sword of justice instead. And some say that Hitler had always been working with the elite or the Black Nobilities on purpose to create a race of people in hatred, to exterminate them, and then use that in the end for an excuse to commit genocide in the future. Now, I'm not saying this is true, but I'm saying I have read articles that people pointing data that leads to that answer. But this is the paradox of Mein Kampf. The book holds a mirror to real suffering, real injustice, and real economic oppression. But every time it draws near to exposing the system, it veers into hatred. This duality is why the book endures. Not as wisdom, but as a warning. Because it shows us how easily truth can be captured, twisted, and weaponized for destruction. Now, we only have 11 people on here tonight because most likely when I put in Mein Kampf, they decided not to do anything with those keywords. That's why we only have 11 people watching tonight. But this is exactly what I'm trying to convey to you people. They control the narrative. They create the Hitlers. They create the Israel. They create the Holocaust. Doesn't matter how many people died. What matters is what people see in the news and on the television. And they know this because they've been brainwashing us. They've been conditioning us to accept their narrative to continue the control grid. Now, here's where the mask slips. Up to this point in Mein Kampf, Hitler can sound like a revolutionary against finance, a voice crying out against monopolies, debt slavery, and parasitic capital. But then he crosses the line from a critique into a curse. He declares that the problem is not merely an economic system or a class of profiteers. He insists the problem is bloodlines. And for Hitler, the faceless system of international finance has a face, and it is Jewish. If Hitler really wanted to go after the Black Nobilities, he would have named the families instead of just naming the Jews. Because he's going after just a race of people, not going after the people themselves. He should have went after names. The names of the dynasties. Like the Habsburgs. The earliest dynasties before the 13 Black Nobilities branched out. From four in Austria to 13 in Europe, pulling the strings. And the venom on his book, Mein Kampf, it drips with venom in every page. And he calls Jews parasites and liars and incarnations of Satan and the eternal maggot in the body of nations. That's not nice. Because it's not, the Jewish bloodline isn't that. If he called the bankers that, parasites, liars, and incarnations of Satan, or the eternal maggot in the body of nations, just bankers, then maybe he could have had the whole world be on his side and go after the bankers. But he didn't do that because I believe he built the narrative to help build the nation of Israel, to bring in the end time events because they make money on it. It's for control. And he claims that corrupt art, politics, and morality itself are the same from these parasites, liars, and incarnations of Satan. And he warns that they deliberately infiltrate press, education, and finance in order to poison the soul of the German people. Well, they do that to us right now. In Hitler's mind, the abstract forces of debt and monopoly were not abstract at all because he was controlled. He was MK Ultra, but there wasn't MK Ultra back then. He was mind controlled. This is the poison thread that runs through the book. Every time a legitimate critique begins, it ends in racial accusations. And every time he rails against the stock exchange, he blames the Jews. And every time he condemns cultural decay, he blames Jews. Sorry, but there's no wisdom in that. He does not allow his followers to hate the system without hating a people. And that is the devil's genius in Hitler's rhetoric. He took the invisible chains of finance and painted them onto the bodies of men, women, and children, demanding they be destroyed. That's not a human being. And it's important to see how effective this was. The German people were desperate for answers. They could not march on a stock exchange in New York or a bank in London, but they could turn against their Jewish neighbors in Berlin, Munich, and Frankfurt. And Hitler gave them a target that they could reach. He turned structural critique into personal hatred. And once that hatred was lit, it became a fire that burned across the continent, consuming millions. This is why Mein Kampf is remembered as a book of hate, not as a book of economics. Its economics critique is inseparable from its own racial venom. And this is why any modern critique of banking or monopolies can so easily be smeared as Nazi. Because Hitler made sure that finance and Jewry were welded together in the minds of his followers. And the truth was poisoned at its root, and I do believe this was on purpose. For us, the lesson should be sobering. We can look at monopolies, debt, slavery, and international finance and see the corruption plainly. But if we allow ourselves to believe that an entire people is the problem, then we have already fallen into the trap. Systems can be reformed, laws can be changed, institutions can be rebuilt, but when critique turns into racial war, reform becomes impossible. And it becomes a crusade of blood, and that road leads only to ruin. The elites could not have asked for a better outcome. Because by fusing truth with hate, Hitler guaranteed that truth itself would be tainted forever. And it worked. It reminds me of the rise of Christianity today, and Christianity coming into huge companies like Palantir, where Palantir is contracting with the government to do all types of espionage and surveillance. How Christianity can make a comeback, and how a leader could come on board. And it's not going to be Trump, but it could be J.D. Vance, who literally says our problem are the banks and the Christians. Are the Christians being set up to be the next race to be hated by a nation and a country? Well, time will tell. And by the time Hitler rose from prison and began steering the Nazi party toward national power, the radical anti-finance thunder of Gottfried Feder had already begun to fade. You see, the movement that had promised to smash interest slavery and liberate the worker from banking chains started to cozy up to the very industrialists and financiers it once denounced. And this is where the truth of Mein Kampf revealed itself, not as a program for liberation, but a rhetorical weapon to gain power. See, what I'm saying to you guys is what I believe is the truth. You see, if you're going to look at the Groypers and call them Nazis, at least understand where they're getting part of what they think is right, but they ignore the part of the racism. Instead, they're replacing the racism against Jews and replacing with the hatred of women. And this is why the Groyper Party is dangerous to America. The most dangerous party I've ever seen hit the scene. If they're truly in the millions, this could spark a new Nazi event. And in the early 1920s, Feder's idea, they were central. And the Nazi Party's 25 points pledged to abolish unearned income and nationalize trusts, break the power of loan capital, and place profit sharing in the hands of workers. Now, these radical promises made the party attractive to those who despised both Marxism and monopoly. Small shopkeepers, artisans, and workers saw in Hitler a leader who might strike against both Wall Street and the Bolsheviks. But behind the scenes, Hitler already recognized that such a radical economic measure would never win the support of Germany's elites, the industrial magnates, the military aristocracy, and the landowners whose money and influence he needed. So he began to make compromises. Feder was sidelined, his interest slavery rhetoric pushed to the margins, and instead of abolishing banks, Hitler courted them. And instead of breaking trusts, he promised to restore order and protect private property. And Krupp Thyssen and I.G. Farben, giants of German industry, came to see Hitler not as a revolutionary threat, but as a useful ally. So they were more afraid of communism than of fascism. And Hitler assured them that under his rule, labor would be disciplined, markets stabilized, and Germany armed for expansion. And the bankers who once seemed enemies now saw opportunity, as Hitler promised to rebuild the nation with massive loans, rearmament, and infrastructure projects like the Autobahn. If this is a whole new Germany that you never even heard of, well, you haven't been given the truth. And this was the betrayal of the heart of his movement. The fiery rhetoric of Mein Kampf against bankers and monopolies never translated into policy. He lied. He caved in. The Nazi regime dismantled unions, crushed workers' movements, and built a war economy in alliance with corporate giants. And Hitler had used the language of anti-finance revolution to gather a mass following. But when power drew near, he chose the elites. The very system he denounced in words, he embraced in deeds. Yet, and here is the cruel twist, he did not abandon the venom. While the anti-bank measures quietly disappeared, the racial poison remained and grew. Jews continued to be scapegoated as the embodiment of finance, corruption, and cultural decay. Even as non-Jewish bankers and industrialists grew rich under the Nazi system. And the hate endured, while the truth was compromised. The people were betrayed, but their fury was kept alive by directing it at their Jewish neighbors, rather than the elites now standing behind Hitler's throne. We have to learn from history, folks, and not repeat it. So this pattern is not unique to Germany. We see it repeated whenever leaders harness the energy of the people against global systems of finance and monopoly, only to redirect that anger into safe channels that leave the elites untouched. And the rhetoric burns with revolutionary fire, but the result is alliance with the very powers that were once condemned. And as always, there is a scapegoat, some group to absorb the rage so that the true architects of oppression remain hidden. Thus, we have just now learned of the pragmatic Hitler. You know, the man who betrayed his own rhetoric when it was no longer useful. The man who traded anti-bank revolution for the embrace of banks, and who kept only the poison of racial hatred as a tool to control the masses. This is why his so-called war on finance was never about liberation, it was about power. Now, the mixture that Hitler perfected in Mein Kampf, a dose of truth laced with venom, was not an accident. It was a calculated formula, and it is one of the most dangerous tools of propaganda ever forged. To understand why, we must first recognize how people in despair think. And believe me, the Groypers are in despair. They've got nothing to lose. And when a nation is broken, when families are starving, when dignity has been stripped away, the human soul craves not only justice, but simplicity. Complex systems like global finance, stock markets, and monetary policy are invisible, intangible, and difficult to grasp. But a scapegoat, a face, a name, a people, that is simple. It satisfies the hunger for clarity. And this is why truth alone, though powerful, is often not enough to mobilize the masses. Truth about debt and monopoly can be dry, abstract, and intellectual. And it takes discipline and patience to understand how interest rates work, how capital flows across borders, or how stock exchanges manipulate economies. Most people don't even have the time, resources, or education to trace these hidden structures. But if a leader can give them a villain that they can see, touch, and hate, then outrage becomes effortless. Hitler understood this better than most, so he created the hatred of the Jews. And it worked. In Mein Kampf, every time he described the corruption of finance, he added a human enemy. And international capital was not merely parasitic, it was Jewish. And the press was not merely manipulative, it was Jewish. And the decadence of art was not merely cultural decline, it was Jewish. And by attaching real grievances to a visible scapegoat, he ensured that the outrage of the people would always find a home. The complex was reduced to very simple: one problem only: Jews. And the people embraced it because it gave them both explanation and action. And they could not march on the stock exchange in New York, but they sure could march on the synagogue of their own town. So this formula, it works because it speaks to the primal instincts of fear and anger. And the truth component ensures credibility. The venom component ensures energy, and together they create a weapon that can move entire nations. But the cost is catastrophic because the people are led not toward reform, but toward destruction. And systems remain untouched while neighbors are destroyed. You see, elites remain secure while minorities are scapegoated. And that's what the Groypers are going to be. Minorities. They're going to be a scapegoat. And the original truth here is the reality of monopolies and debt slavery is going to be buried beneath the rubble of hatred, as people are going to start hating these Groypers. And this is why truth mixed with hate is more dangerous than lies. This is the irony of them quoting Mein Kampf and not even understanding the principle behind why Hitler hated the Jews. A lie can be exposed, but a truth poisoned with hate cannot be separated. It traps the seeker because the moment he embraces the truth, he also swallows the venom. And this is why Hitler's words continue to haunt us. He took genuine grievances that echo in our time, and bound them together to forever to anti-Semitism. Sure worked for the elite, especially the Rothschilds. And as a result, to speak against finance today is to risk being accused of echoing Hitler. The elites could not have devised a better shield for themselves in the future. And this is also why intelligence agencies and psychological operators continue to use this tactic. If you want to discredit a movement, you do not suppress its truth. You attach extremism to it, Groypers, and you lace it with hatred, hate women. Then, when the world sees it, the truth is condemned along with the poison. This is the legacy of Mein Kampf. It is not just a book of hate. It is a manual in how to weaponize truth against itself. And here's where the spiritual lesson breaks through. This is the oldest tactic of the enemy of our souls. Satan rarely offers pure lies. He mixes truth with corruption. He offered Eve the promise of wisdom, but laced it with rebellion. He offered Jesus the kingdoms of the world, but laced it with idolatry. And he offered the German people the truth about finance, but laced it with hatred of their neighbor. And this is how darkness hides in light. And this is why discernment, separating wheat from tares, is the task of every generation. So when the Second World War ended and the world uncovered the horror of the camps, the mass graves, and the machinery of extermination, Hitler's words could never again be read as just political theory. So Mein Kampf was exposed as a seedbed of genocide. And for many decades, governments tried to suppress it, ban its printing, and keep it from circulation, which made it only worse. But as often happens with forbidden texts, the attempt at censorship gave it a new allure for those seeking rebellion. Slowly, it became less a political manual and more a badge of identity for the disaffected and the hateful. In the post-war years, neo-Nazi movements in Germany, Britain, and America began to circulate Mein Kampf underground. It never went anywhere. And by the 60s and 70s, it had become a rallying text for white supremacists in the United States, including the Ku Klux Klan, who used it to inject Hitler's racial venom into their own ideology. Skinhead gangs in the 80s carried copies of it as a kind of a talisman, not because they cared about the nuances of banking critiques, or Feder's distinction between productive and rapacious capital, but because it gave them a scripture that sanctified their hatred. And in these circles, Hitler was not seen as a failed leader who betrayed his own rhetoric to serve elites. No, they didn't get that part of history, but they see him as a martyr for the white race, a prophet of racial purity. So the irony here, folks, is staggering. The parts of Mein Kampf that critiques monopoly, stock exchange, capital, and international finance, the parts that touched on real truth were largely forgotten. Why? Is because we've been dumbed down. And what survived and spread was the poison. Hate groups stripped away the original context and clung to the racial epithets and the anti-Semitic tyrants and the glorification of blood and soil. The economic grievances that gave Hitler his following were discarded, but the venom was preserved, distilled, and spread like a contagion into every corner of extremist subculture. So this is why Mein Kampf became, in the public imagination, not a book about economics at all, but the white skinhead Bible. And when the media or governments refer to it today, they do not think of it as a tax on interest slavery or monopoly capital. They think only of it as anti-Semitism, its racial mythology, and the way it inspired violence. So in this way, the poison completely overshadowed the truth. And the elites benefited doubly from this transformation. On the one hand, Hitler's fusion of truth and hate gave them a perfect historical smear. Anyone who raised questions about global banking could now be tarred with the accusations of Nazism. And on the other hand, extremist groups that waved Hitler's words like a flag made it even easier for elites to discredit populist dissent. Brilliant, isn't it? This was all staged and done on purpose for control. And so the truth about finance was buried again, this time under the boots and shaved heads of men who thought Hitler's book gave them purpose. But here lies another spiritual lesson. When the truth is contaminated, it does not simply vanish. It actually mutates. It becomes a counterfeit scripture for those already lost in hatred. What could have been an honest movement against financial corruption had twisted into a racial cult. And even now, when young men stumble across Mein Kampf online, it is rarely the critique of finance that grips them. It is the poison, the intoxicating lie that they are chosen and others are corruptors. That's all bullshit. We're all the same. We're all human beings. Thus, Hitler's words live on, not as liberation, but as chains for another generation. And here's the cruel twist. The very elites that Hitler claimed to fight ended up profiting from the poison that he mixed into the truth, still to this day. And because once he tied economic critique to racial hatred, the entire field of opposition was compromised. Anyone who dared to speak against central banks, debt slavery, and monopolies could be dismissed with a single word. You're a Nazi. And the truth became untouchable because it had been welded as hate. So this is one of the most effective shields the global order has ever had. Consider it. A politician who raises concerns about Wall Street speculation is accused of flirting with fascist ideas. An activist who condemns the international banking system is smeared as anti-Semitic. A movement that questions global monopolies is tarred with the brush of Hitler. And why? Because Hitler made sure that all of these critiques were forever associated with his racial theology. He was in on it. And the elites could not have scripted it better themselves. And indeed, many of them did benefit directly from his betrayal. They did. Once in power, Hitler's abandoned Feder's radical program, and he preserved the banks. He partnered with industrial giants like Krupp and IG Farben, and he used the very instruments of finance he once condemned to fuel his war machine. The bankers he railed against became his collaborators, and in turn, they became richer than ever. Even international financiers outside Germany profited from loans, from war production, and from the economic chaos that followed. So Hitler's words struck at finance, but his deeds strengthened it. He was a bad man. And the result was perfect for the elite. The masses were whipped into frenzy, but their rage was directed at scapegoats instead of systems. Jews were destroyed, while bankers, many of them not Jewish at all, remained in their palaces. Monopolies grew stronger, not weaker, and when the war ended, the world emerged into a financial order more centralized than before. One in which the very institutions Hitler claimed to hate gained even more dominance. Can you now see how that was all planned? Because this pattern is not unique to Hitler's Germany. It is the same pattern we see in modern controlled opposition. Truth is not suppressed. It is contaminated. Movements are not silenced. They are steered into extremes that discredit them. Groypers, they're coming. And the moment a populist movement mixes its critiques with hatred or violence, it becomes safe for the elites. Groypers are wonderful for the bankers right now. And they can point to it, condemn it, and in the process shield themselves from the truth once it arrives and once it's carried on. And the poison truth is more useful to them than silence ever could be. So this is why Mein Kampf still functions as a weapon today. Not because people are reading its economic passages, but because its very existence gives the elites a trump card. No pun intended. The moment you mention global finance, they conjure Hitler. The moment you speak of monopoly power, they accuse you of fascist rhetoric. Hitler handed them this tool by lacing truth with venom, and nearly a century later, they are still using it today. Now, the lesson here is stark, folks. The elites do not need to erase the truth if they can corrupt it. They do not need to silence opposition if they can make it self-destruct. Hitler's book was their greatest gift because it turned legitimate critique into a curse word. And that is why the global order, far from being shaken by Hitler's war, emerged stronger in its aftermath. Now, if the great danger of Mein Kampf was that it tied truth to hatred, then the task before us is to reclaim the truth without the poison. That means building an opposition that strikes at systems, not souls. And not with hatred. Hating women. Where does that even come from? From the Groypers. One Groyper was arguing with me that why does it make sense to have a woman who has a period every month, who's emotionally out of whack, run the world? I'm like, my argument was, well, if she was older and gone through the menopause stage and, is a senior, but just like the others, she doesn't have that problem anymore. But maybe that's just a quick, smart return on things. But regardless, that kind of thinking is stinking. And I don't like it. And I'm seeing exactly what happened in Germany happen to America right now. Except the Nazi party of then is going to turn into the Groypers. And that means building an opposition that strikes at systems, not souls. And that's what the Groypers are for. For the problem of debt slavery, monopoly, and central banking is not a problem of blood or race. It's a problem of mammon. What God said is the root of all evil. The love of mammon. And the mammon of men and women of every race and nation who bow to the god of money and use it to enslave others. That's the cause. A clean opposition begins by naming the system for what it is. I think I've done it. And when banks are allowed to conjure money from nothing and bind nations in chains and debt, that is not the fault of the people. It is the fault of an institution. When monopolies grow so large they can destroy entire communities with the flick of a pen, that is not the fault of bloodlines. It is the fault of laws that protect greed. And when speculation on the stock market robs workers of their pensions and homes, like in 2008, it is not because of a culture, it's because of corruption. Systems can be exposed, policies can be reformed, and laws can be changed, but none of this requires hatred. And this is where discernment becomes so vital. Hitler's poison worked because he gave people a visible scapegoat. But true reform refuses scapegoats. It insists on tracing corruption back to its structures, contracts, and laws. It insists on naming sin where it is, in greed, in usury, in secrecy, not in the accidents of race or birth. It fights mammon, not mankind. So what does this look like in practice? Well, it looks like demanding transparency in central banking so that no unelected cabal controls the lifeblood of money. It looks like breaking monopolies through antitrust enforcement so that no corporation is too big to fail. It looks like offering alternatives like public banks, community credit, cooperative ownership that return power to the people. It looks like teaching our children that the love of money, not the identity of our neighbor, is the root of this evil. And above all, it looks like refusing to let elites use Hitler's poison as a shield. When they say no, or when they say to critique the banks is to be Nazi, we answer no. To critique the banks is to honor justice. To scapegoat a people is to betray it. You see, we separate truth from venom, wheat from tares, so that reform can proceed without the curse of hatred. And this is not merely a political task, it's a spiritual one, because the enemy of our souls always seeks to corrupt truth with lies. And he does it to keep us from using truth as a weapon of light. And the way we defeat him is by refusing to let truth be captured. We proclaim it clean, we wield it with love, and we direct it at systems and not souls. And in this way, we redeem what Hitler tried to destroy. We show that the critique of monopolies, debt, and finance does not belong to him. It belongs to the people, to those who love justice, and ultimately God himself, who declares woe upon those who grind the faces of the poor. The task is not to abandon the truth, but because it was poisoned, but to cleanse it and wield it rightly. And that is the calling of a clean opposition. Now, the tactic Hitler used, mixing truth with poison, is not buried in the past. It has been refined, repackaged, and deployed again and again and again in modern age. What Mein Kampf did to the critique of finance in the 1920s is exactly what Tavistock Institute and intelligence networks do to the grassroots movements of today. They know that raw truth can be dangerous if it grows unchecked. They also know that lies alone cannot move the masses. So they lace truth with extremism, hate, or absurdity, the Groypers, until the whole movement self-destructs. So consider how controlled opposition works, folks. A movement begins with genuine grievances, anger at monopolies, distrust of government secrecy, opposition to foreign wars. And these grievances are real and resonate with people. But then the movement gets hijacked. Leaders appear, often manufactured or funded quietly, who inject racism, wild conspiracy, or calls for violence. Charlie Kirk's death from a Groyper. And the moment this happens, the movement is marked. Why is Nick Fuentes not under investigation right now? And the media points to it, condemns it, and the elites breathe easier. So the truth at the heart of the movement is now toxic. Anyone who raises it will be accused of being part of the discredited group. And this is the same formula that Hitler used. He began with real economic truths, then poisoned them with racial venom. And the people rallied, the elites co-opted, and in the end, the truth itself was rendered untouchable. Tavistock Institute and its imitators used the same psychological sleight of hand. They let the people glimpse a fragment of truth, then twist it into the grotesque caricature so that the truth is buried with the lie. And look how this plays out in our time. The Q movement began by exposing the reality of corruption, trafficking, and elite networks of power. Truths that no honest man can deny. But the movement was quickly flooded with theatrical prophecies, failed predictions, and outlandish claims. Now to mention the elite trafficking is to risk being dismissed as a QAnon believer. Do you see where I'm getting at, folks? We've been played again. And the truth was buried beneath the absurd. And the Groypers, too, present themselves as anti-globalist, anti-monopoly, and against the lies of media, but their rhetoric is laced with misogyny, extremism, and the cult of personality. Once again, truth has been tainted so that it can be mocked and used for gain. So it's the Hitler playbook. And when they quote me, Mein Kampf, the irony of a Groyper quoting me, Mein Kampf, because I've just proven to you and shown to you that the elite used Hitler for their gain, just like they're going to use the Groypers. Now, this is a Hitler playbook updated for the modern era, folks. And Tavistock, with its long history of psychological operations, knows exactly what it is doing. They weaponize the mechanism of truth plus add poison. And because it works, it divides the people. It discredits opposition. And it leaves the elite stronger than before. And this is why I only have 15 followers instead of 1,000 last night. Because the truth is coming out of this microphone. The lesson of part 10, what we just read, is simple but sobering. We must expect this playbook to be used in every generation. And when a movement arises that speaks truth about the global war, watch for the poison. Watch for the injection of hate. No, there's hate for women. There's hate, literally. It's there. And the promotion of absurdity, the temptation to violence. And these are the fingerprints of the enemy. And if we fall for it, we will find ourselves where Germany found itself in the 30s, holding a poisoned truth that leads not to freedom, but to ruin. But if we resist, if we separate the wheat from the tares, then the truth can live cleanly, brightly, and powerfully. It can expose the system without being chained to hate. It can shine light without giving darkness a foothold. And that is the only way to break the playbook of Tavistock. And it is the only way to ensure that Hitler's curse does not repeat itself in our time. So to conclude, the story that we have traced tonight is a warning written in blood. A man who began by naming real wounds in chains and debt and strangling power of monopolies, the humiliation of a defeated people, chose to cure those wounds with poison. Adolf Hitler took truths that could have been harnessed for justice and fused them with racial hatred until the truth itself became radioactive. That corruption did not end with 1945. It mutated and it spread. And in our time, figures like Nick Fuentes and the loose Groyper movement openly praise Hitler and draw on Nazi language and symbols to crown their politics, and those networks repeatedly recycle passages, slogans, and imagery from Mein Kampf to legitimize anti-Semitic, nativist, and violent ideas. This is not incidental. It's not even by accident. When modern actors quote Hitler or weaponize his phrases, they are doing exactly what he did. They take fragments of the truth about global power and drape them in a racial theology so that the critique cannot stand on its own. And that tactic makes reformers work even harder and gives the elites a ready-made smear. Raise the problem of finance and you risk being associated with the very hatred that turned truth into a crime. This is what's happening. The living heirs of that tactic, the Groypers, Fuentes, and the similar movements, use Mein Kampf and Nazi rhetoric not to clarify problems, but to obscure them with violence and scapegoating, ensuring attention falls on spectacle rather than structured remedy. See, the banks are having a hard time right now trying to control the West because the West is so in debt. And they're having a hard time trying to get World War III to go to war with the East. So they've got to put the Groypers out there to get everybody to talk and then get to hate someone else, to move the mantle so that we're not paying attention to what they're doing by stealing from us even more. So what we must do as a people of conscience and as a movement committed to fighting the New World Order without falling into its traps, well, we must reclaim the critique and cleanse it. Shows like this need to be forwarded to other people so they can understand what's going on. We must speak plainly about debt, about the monopolies that crush neighborhoods, about the law and contract structures that allow predatory finance to grow. But we must never name an entire people as an enemy or a bloodline. We must expose institutions and demand transparent remedies, stronger antitrust enforcement, public banking alternatives, debt relief, and rules that make markets serve human life rather than devour it. And at the same time, we must call out and reject those who borrow Hitler's language to justify hatred. When people like Fuentes or the Groypers quote Mein Kampf, we must refuse the framing and refuse to let their venom define the movement for justice. And finally, this is a pastoral charge, from one Christian to another. The enemy's craft is old. He mixes light with darkness to blind the faithful. And our work must be different, rigorous, patient, and merciful. We must teach the difference between systems and souls, politics and people, reformation and revenge. And we must not throw away truth because it was once defiled. We must purify it with law, with love, and with unflinching moral clarity. And when we do, We rob the elites of the smear that they have long relied on, and we offer the world a path to real justice that does not demand the blood of the innocent. And pretty much, if we can figure all of that out and come together as one, well, I do believe this world would be a better place.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
This has been Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Garner. Tune in tomorrow night when God gives me another revelation to tell you guys all about. God bless you, God keep you, and God thank you for supporting my show. Go to jamesgarner.com and sign up to my newsletter. That's the only way I can get a hold of you if I get shut down. And download my books. They're free. Go to elitepotion.com and sign up for my award-winning detox program of parasites and heavy metals. You'll feel better, I promise. It protects the temple. And if you could all do me one big favor, if you could all just try to love your neighbor, well, again, I do believe this world would be a better place. We'll see you guys tomorrow.